Hey guys, welcome back. Tisha here, back for another chapter reading of Shattered Dreams. So far, we're liking it. So let's go ahead and pick up with chapter 3. I finally got my mother's permission to move to Hurricane, Utah, where Aunt Rhea now taught school and lived with the 4 of her children who weren't already off pursuing plural marriages themselves. Without telling my aunt I was coming, I caught a ride to Salt Lake City with some friends, then rode a Greyhound bus all by myself the whole 6 hours to Hurricane, a dusty, wind-blown town below the climbing plateau to Zion's Canyon. At 14 now, I overcame my fears and made that scary grown-up trip because I was desperate for some kindness and stability. Commodities at Aunt Rhea's house always seem to have in extra measure. So she left her mother's home where her mother and her siblings were being abused to now hopefully being in a place where she would get some love and she wouldn't have to worry about a stepfather who was doing those things. I wonder what happened to her sisters. Despite my surprising her, she seemed pleased to see me, and she allowed me to spend the year with her while I attended the 9th grade. So they didn't have that conversation first before she got permission to go. She just popped up. I got that it was a surprise, but I thought she meant like the day, not necessarily her coming at all. I felt some lingering guilt about leaving my sisters back in Trout Creek, where a horse could torment them, but I had to live my life. Besides, he and I fought so much, I thought they might all be better off without me there. I don't think Aunt Rhea knew about Mother's marriage to Horace at this point, but she knew things were not as they should be with her sister in Trout Creek. She took it as her personal duty to set an example and to help Olive's spiritually undernourished kids to embrace polygamy. So once I got to Hurricane, she poured it on, mostly just by being herself, getting up early to study the scripture, praying continually, always talking about the gospel relative to exaltation through plural marriage, relating her many dreams and visions of things that were sure to happen in the future. Interesting how she keeps pushing plural marriage to her, yet she's not married to her father right now, or at least she's left the father. I thought she went a little overboard at times, but she cared about me and took me in, so I listened. To this day, I wonder if she really understood how messed up I was that 9th grade year. Probably so, because she put energy into straightening me out. It seemed there were certain aspects of the principle I had yet to learn or that I'd simply never focused on before, and Rhea meant to fill me in, help me focus. After all, I was getting to the age at which I might sorely need to know these things, because she's 14 and we know they marry them young. Part of the beauty of polygamy, she claimed, was the advantage it gave women who wanted to marry. All right thinking women, in her opinion. Within the principle, girls generally got to choose their husbands, not the other way around. Indeed, it really eliminated all the competition among the fair sex. If a girl wanted a man who was already married, no problem. She could just make her desires known, and the other wives were supposed to welcome her into the fold. The bigger the family here, the bigger the kingdom there. So everyone was supposed to rejoice when the family expanded, whether with wife or with child. Since each new wife was supposed to contribute several new children, perhaps they were even the greater asset. And to the gentlemen, the brethren who were looking toward godhood, more wives, of course, meant more celestial prestige. Why would they ever turn anyone down? Ugh. The proverbial wisdom floating around polygamous circles stated it bluntly. If a man didn't love or desire a particular girl who wanted him, he should marry her anyway. This is the problem. They don't marry for love. That's the problem. He should marry her anyway and just hope for love the next time around. So if I don't love this woman, that's okay, because I can have another woman and hopefully I'll love that woman, which is why we see things like what we see with the Browns, where they don't have the same type of treatment because the man doesn't love them. One of the many brethren waiting in the wings would surely snap up any available woman. He did not. Next, Aunt Rhea said, I must understand the role of a plural wife. It was singular to have children. The reason were many: to obey God's commandments, to make our husbands more deserving of exaltation, to thereby attain exaltation for ourselves, and to help populate the worlds we would rule throughout eternity. The prophet Brigham Young had given it yet another emphasis. There are multitudes of pure and holy spirits waiting to tabernacle bodies. Now, what is our duty? To prepare tabernacles for them, to take a course that will not tend to drive those spirits into families of the wicked, where they will be trained in wickedness, debauchery, and every species of crime. It is the duty of every righteous man and woman to prepare tabernacles for all the spirits they can. Goodness gracious, y'all. This is the reason why the doctrine of plurality of wives was revealed, that the noble spirits which are waiting for tabernacles might be brought forth. To these ends, polygamous wives were encouraged to have children every year for as long as they could. They are designed to be incubators. That is their design. I was young and strong, and my prime years for childbearing were fast approaching. Goodness. Finally, Aunt Rhea taught me the law of purity. It first entailed abstaining from most any physical contact with the opposite sex prior to marriage. Even kissing was disallowed. Once married, contact was allowed within strict limits. I discovered that sex had the same singular role within polygamous families that wives had: procreation. So we're not having sex because we love each other and we want to enjoy one another. We're having sex so we can make babies. Goodness gracious. Aunt Rhea said each of us possessed a divine procreative power we were to use only for divine procreative purposes. So they're only having sex because they want to have a kid. At least for the women, that's what it is. For the men, I doubt that they're going into it thinking the same thing. Aunt Rhea said each of us possessed that power. If a husband and a wife indulge in sex for any other purpose, they could even commit adultery with each other. This is crap. Consequently, it doesn't say this is crap, sorry. I'm saying it. Consequently, it was forbidden during pregnancy, lactation, and menses, as well as after menopause. What? Menses? What's menses? Oh, menses. Sorry, menses. As well as after menopause. I wondered, even then, if it was okay to enjoy sex whenever it had to be done in order to bring forth the annual child. But I didn't dare ask my pious aunt. She told me the story of a wonderfully devout polygamous woman who had sex only 9 times in her whole life, and she had 9 kids to show for it. Isn't that beautiful, Rensky? My aunt said at the end of the story. She was such an obedient spiritual soul. I just wish we all could be so righteous. I suspected she meant me, and I wanted to be that good too, but of course I had yet to be tested. Let me tell you something. If they're only doing it 9 times the whole time they were married, then there's one of 2 things happening. Number 1, they don't like each other. Number 2, they're not enjoying themselves. Because 9 times, okay. 2 of Aunt Rhea's daughters, Donna and Myra, were already married. The second and third wives of the same man. Married to the same man, of course. I was very close to Donna, even though she was 7 years older. She and Myra, along with 2 of my Aunt Ellen's daughters, lived about 28 miles south of Hurricane, all the way down on the Utah-Arizona border in a growing polygamous homestead settlement called Short Creek. Under the direction of a man claiming to be a prophet of God, at least 40 fundamentalist men moved their families into this far-flung, out-of-the-way place to escape the gaze of observers and the law. Some built houses, while others lived temporarily in whatever shelter they could find, such as trailers with lean-tos or large army tents. 3 of my sisters lived in cleaned out chicken coops, the other half in finished houses. There's no way that I'd be okay with living in a chicken coop voluntarily. Like they just volunteered to go and do this. Not because things were already that dire. They went into this. The idea was for the settlement to become self-sufficient so that its members could live as independent of the outside world as possible. Nothing like Short Creek had been around in my younger years, but there was a precedent for it. Joseph Smith called this sort of communal living the United Order. The people at Short Creek said they were making a concerted effort to live the United Order. To this end, every household displayed a photograph of their prophet in the way Catholics might display a picture of the Pope. Each family also hung a plaque to remind them the kingdom of God or nothing. I visited my sister at the creek often, which gave me a chance to get acquainted with almost everyone in town. Most of the colonists were related to one another, either by blood or by marriage, because all they do is marry each other, and there's siblings that are marrying the same guy and all that other stuff. This gets tricky. Contrary to the way Aunt Rhea told me it should work, older men in Short Creek often traded their young daughters to each other for wives. I knew of several instances in which a man married a widow or a divorcee with several children, and then he also married her young girls when they reach puberty. Sometimes even before. I'm married to this man, and my daughter is going to marry him too? What? So you're basically trying to make it seem like it's okay for these men to assault these little girls by calling it marriage. That's what this is. Ooh-wee. Of course, those lusty men always claim they never did a thing without a revelation from God. This is some crap. It's crazy how with each book we find out more and more about how jacked up the different cults are that are following this belief system, and then they wonder why we see what we see with like the Browns, where everything is just trash. So far, only one family, and they probably got their secrets too, that I've seen that this has been successful for is the Dargers on TV. Well, no, there's more. Let me not just put it to one. I'm just saying of the big names that we hear. Okay, let me get back to this. Soon, I became friendly with the Short Creek girls my own age. During the time I knew them, several disappeared from public view, only to reappear months later with new babies in their arms. Her own age. She's what, 14? And 14-year-olds are disappearing and then coming back, birthing a child at 14. Most of these girls were secretly married off to men old enough to be their fathers. It was done in secret just because that was the polygamous way. Subsequent marriages were always kept quiet so members of the community could claim ignorance if anyone from the outside ever questioned them about specific relationships. Is that the only reason why they're keeping it quiet? Because part of me feels like they're keeping it quiet as well because they know it's wrong. None of these young wives and mothers ever mentioned the word love when they finally whispered the truth to me. Not once. One 14-year-old girl who just had her first baby confided in me that she never even had a menstrual period until after the baby was born. This is sick. Her husband had married her at that young age so she could bear as many children as possible. This was important to him because he wanted to become a god with his own kingdom in heaven, where he and his wives and children could be numberless and beget spirit children to populate other worlds. Okay, what I don't understand about this faith is once you populate these worlds, then what? What happens after that? Conveniently, the Short Creek elders sent most of the young unmarried men away on what were called work missions. So the young guys that these girls should actually be with are gone, but we're going to give them an older man so that they can work with them. They went on these work missions where they were to earn money for the colony while they learned trades, mostly in construction. During these 2-year stints, the young men were advised to live with other fundamentalists who would give them free room and board. Their entire paychecks were then sent back to the leaders for the support of the giant polygamous families back home and to advance the work of God. So they have these people, didn't mean to kick the camera. They have these people working for free and giving over their checks under the guise of this is helping the kingdom. While these other men are at home getting these young girls, impregnating them, and enjoying the hard work of the young boys. This seemed well and good in theory, but I couldn't help noticing how God seemed biased against these young men. While they were away, he gave revelations to the older men to marry all the young, healthy, beautiful girls. Exactly. Then when the young bachelors returned from their work missions, they were rewarded with the leftovers, girls who were obese, homely, handicapped, or ill. Understandably, many of these young men questioned God's supposed will for them. Still, they mostly complied, assured that they could marry girls that they desired later on. This goes back to, you got to marry these pickings. This is all that's left right now. Go ahead and marry them, even though you don't love them. And what's going to happen now is once you find a wife that you really like and you marry her, then you're going to end up treating the other person who probably didn't want to marry you in the first place like crap. Like they deserve more mistreatment. As I took these things in, naughty little thoughts crept into my mind. I began to think of the brethren's so-called godly testimonies as testiphonies. Well, that's what they are, because they're making it up. It's not real. Every Friday, several of us would go to dances at the creek. I danced the Scottish polka, the Virgin Reel, the two-step, the waltz, and the John Paul Jones. I generally had the time of my life dancing with the married men, every one whom was available. Why is she dancing with married men? Why is this reminding me of Robin and Cody dancing together while Mary looked on? This is what these people do. God must have gotten his wires crossed, however. Within a matter of months, he'd given 12 different men revelations that I should be his next wife. I wonder why God didn't spare us all the confusion by giving me the revelation, because God didn't reveal that to them. Their lust for her revealed that to them. Meanwhile, Donna and Myra wanted me to marry their husband so we could all be together in eternity. I became increasingly concerned about God's future plans for me. How could I know for myself what he wanted me to do? Was I even to take the polygamous path my mother took? If I did, I would somehow have to do it more successfully, more righteously. And if I took the path, would I let others, like these brethren at Short Creek, tell me who God meant to bind me to forever? My heart told me no to all of this. I recall the day I cried alone for hours under the mesquite tree after mother finally told me she married Horace. All that I wanted that day was one person to love me and love me well. That was still what I wanted in the depths of my soul. And when I pictured it, my future husband and me, there were no other wives in other bedrooms down the hall. Even that young, she knew that this is not what she was desiring. But her faith, the people around her, told her this is what she should want. But Aunt Rhea and dear Donna and all these brethren who'd I been taught to trust as the mouthpieces of God were telling me it should be otherwise. I so wanted to belong. If only God would testify to me personally that polygamy was his call for me. One Sunday at the creek, I heard a sermon by Brother Hammond that profoundly impacted my thinking on all this. Mary, the mother of Christ, was only 14 when he was born. The brother told us, now he said time is running out before Christ returns. So any girls who feel led to do so should follow in the virgin's footsteps immediately by marrying and having children before it's too late. It's like every single turn, they are being told that their sole purpose is to give birth, and they misuse biblical information and twist it to their will. They have these people who've created this doctrine and twist it to their will. That's why a lot of times when man is involved with stuff, I don't quite trust it. And I'm not talking about like man as in the gender. I'm saying like human beings. You got to think for yourself sometimes and come to your own conclusions, because a lot of stuff really involves people putting their own personal spin on it. However, from here on out, none of us were to do any more courting on our own. Instead, the leading brethren would seek special revelations from God, so each girl would be sure to marry the partner God chose for her. So the brethren are the only people who can talk to God? The women can't talk to God? I don't understand. It seemed all the revealing God had been doing to the individual brethren had gotten thoroughly out of hand. He'd been telling many of them to marry the very same attractive young girls, and this was clearly not the direction righteous polygamy was to take. The elders of Short Creek Colony felt they had to step in and referee as best as they could, so they decided that all God's divine revelations on the topic of marriage would henceforth be disseminated only through them. This is not good. One of these leading brethren, Uncle Rich, took me aside one evening to speak with me about his son Bill, who had his eye on me. Uncle Rich preached to us both for over an hour. He felt I should be sealed, married to Bill, and he insisted we go straight to his house so he can perform our marriage ceremony. I flatly refused. I told him I was too young and that I was still under my mother's jurisdiction. He pompously refuted that, saying because my mother left my father, she had no authority over me. Wait a second. So my mom left my dad. She has no authority over me. My dad's not here. Have you talked to my dad? Who has authority over me now? Oh, let me guess. One of the brethren? This is crazy. Let's see. For that matter, my father, he's answering my question right here, had no authority over me either, because he refused to follow the other brethren and moved down to Short Creek. How are you telling this girl what she's supposed to do with her body? Who's she supposed to do what she wants to do with? You don't even barely know her, and yet you're telling her that she's supposed to marry your son, and you essentially have authority over her. She doesn't have authority over her own self. Consequently, I should be obedient to him because Uncle Rich, in his words, is God's true servant. When I remained defiant, he ordered Bill to never see me again. Good for her. Good for her. Because how dare you come up to somebody and tell them that? But this is what they do, you guys. I grown up believing the brethren, the men who held the priesthood, talked directly with God. After all, Joseph Smith talked with them. I thought fundamentalist elders especially were good men who consulted God's will for everything they did. Now, I began to wonder. But of one thing I remain certain, polygamy itself was God's way. If sin happened to raise its head in the course of our trying to live out this gospel, it wasn't the gospel's fault. Any failure was merely the result of human weakness. In the end, I determined that if I lived plural marriage, I was going to do it on my own and in God's terms, not those of some old man. Nobody would boss me around except God, and even He had better tread lightly. Good job. Cleve LeBaron lived in Hurricane, not far from Aunt Rhea. Years later, he helped my mother because she was an unmarried woman living on a small income. He may even have wanted to marry her, but she never been able to obtain that divorce from my father, so she was off limits to the brethren. She probably wouldn't have married him anyway, since everyone knew the LeBarons had insanity in their family. Still, Cleve brought us sacks of beans and potatoes and whatever fruit was in season. One day, in late 1951, a friend and I stopped by his home in Hurricane to say hello. When I walked into his parlor that afternoon, I found a tall, strikingly handsome stranger there already. His hair was blonde, and his eyes were a brilliant blue. Cleve asked me if I knew him. I didn't, but I found myself so irresistibly drawn to those eyes, I didn't bother answering. We stared at each other far longer than was necessary when a bolt of knowing tingled down my spine, and in an inner voice told me, "This is the man you're going to marry." Why is everything with them always a bolt of lightning or something like that? But I don't know. Okay. I get a little tingle too when I see my man, but I didn't experience a bolt. Oh my goodness. Maybe I'm not supposed to marry. No, let me stop. I don't want to be insensitive to what they're taught. It's just weird that they all are taught this thing. So they all have this same, because that's how the Browns described it, a bolt. It's like, okay, are we kids here? Oh, she is a kid. I couldn't believe it. Could this finally be the revelation from God I've been begging for? I wanted it to be so. Cleve interrupted. "This is my nephew, Verlin LeBaron, from Mexico." A kaleidoscope of thoughts flashed through my mind in an instant. I recalled that some of the LeBarons lived in Mexico, colonizing there in order to escape America's stricter enforcement of its anti-bigamy laws. I also heard about the special priesthood the LeBaron clan claimed to possess as direct spiritual descendants of Joseph Smith. They told people the prophet to be revealed through them would thereby be higher in rank than the president of the LDS Church. Then there was all the talk of the insanity running through the LeBaron's bloodline. Why I'd even seen Crazy Ben LeBaron at Salt Lake City polygamous meeting where the brethren had to bodily throw him out because he was yelling. That sentence read weird. So she's saying that she saw him being thrown out. Just a weird way she rated it. "I'm greater than Jesus Christ." On another occasion, rumor had it that Ben commenced doing 100 push-ups in the middle of a busy street in downtown Salt Lake. When police officers came to arrest him, he challenged them boldly. "None of you can do that. So it proves I'm the one mighty and strong." Now here was Ben's brother smiling up at me. Verlin stretched out his hand, and I took it. He held on tightly as he raised himself to his feet. A beautiful broad grin showed his perfect white teeth. I was captivated. These LeBarons are dangerous and bad news, so I'm interested to see what this is going to do and how this is going to play out. "Hi," he said, pausing to look me over. "Are you Charlotte's little sister?" I nodded and answered, "Yes, I'm Irene. I live with her and my Aunt Rhea." I wonder how he knew Charlotte. "Could you give me directions to your house then? I've come down to Provo to spend the weekend and see her." Oh. The very first twinge of jealousy panged my heart. Oh God, I thought You just said he'd be my husband. Oh well, I'm only 14. Maybe I'll still have him in my future. I was content enough thinking Verlin might be in my plans, but I seriously wondered if I could cope with 19-year-old Charlotte in them. Weeks later, the newly engaged Charlotte and 21-year-old Verlin were outside of Aunt Rhea's house in his gray Pontiac about to leave for Short Creek. 3 of my half-brothers and sisters, and I begged them to take us along. Charlotte gave us the most defiant no and added hotly, "We've been invited as a couple, and we are going alone." Charlotte was very serious and pious like her mother, and I loved to tease her, so I whispered to John and Sam and then grabbed Karen's hand, pulling the 4 of us into the back seat of the car. We acted as if we had every right to be there. "Well, let's go then," I said. "We're all couples." Oh, goodness. Charlotte turned and gave me one of her icy stares. I got the message, giggling. We all scrammed out the car. They drove off without so much as a wave or a smile. Because Verlin had no prior wives, their wedding 3 months later was a public celebration. I handled it well enough, but I cried when I went home that night. Okay, so she's really into this man. If I were to ever become a polygamous wife, there would be so many different things to bear. Even then, I resented Verlin for making love to my half-sister. I wondered how he could ever love me if he were busy making love to her. Well, is he making love? Because a lot of y'all don't love each other in the beginning. So did he love her? I recalled what Brigham Young said, that plural marriage would damn more people than it would save. Then why even try it? I longed to have a man just for myself. But according to my religion, that was selfish and short-sighted. If I love monogamy, I might be happy in this life, but not for the eternities. In the scripture, God warned that the angels did not abide in my law. Therefore, they cannot be enlarged, but remain separately and singly without exaltation in their safe condition to all eternity, and from henceforth are not gods, but are angels of God forever and ever. That came from the Doctrine and Covenants, 132:17. I've been lonely enough in this lifetime without having to spend all eternity separately and singly. I worry that if I didn't follow God's law of polygamy, I completely lose out. I often wish I'd been born Catholic, like a friend of mine. She seemed so much at peace after each confession. Because Catholics confess to priests. Yeah, okay. Confess to God, girl. If you can't be a Catholic and you want to confess to him. No, I'm just saying. I really didn't know what sins I had that would amount to much, but I figured the main ones were swearing and being light-minded. If only that was all standing between me and glory, but I knew better. I was one of the special children of God. I remember the scripture, "For of him unto much is given, much is required." I wanted to become a goddess and receive the highest exaltation in heaven. Would I throw that away in order to satisfy my small, selfish desires in the present? The possibility that I might quite terrified me. The choice was mine. If mother was an indication, I'd get no second chance to make the right one. Yes, here I was in the very same place she'd been with just 2 options, both of them terrible: suffer now or suffer later, be loved today or be exalted tomorrow. How I wish God might have thought to forge us at least one other way. And that is the end of chapter 3. But guess what? I'm going to keep going because you're only getting 2 of these this week. So I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 4. Only because I like y'all. Chapter 4. Toward the end of May, Mother met me in Salt Lake City. She was still married to Horace, and the two of them drove me back to the Trout Creek homestead. I was now 15. When we got home, Mother mentioned that Horace had a 28-year-old nephew named Glenn Spencer, who was shy and an available bachelor. I'd actually seen him before because he was the local postmaster. Glenn also worked on the Nelson Ranch, which meant he had limited time for a social life. Out near Trout Creek, there weren't many girls for him to socialize with anyway. Mother didn't seem at all concerned that Glenn was so much older than me, that he was Horace's relative, or that he wasn't a polygamist. What is wrong with her mom? This man is beating on you and treats you like crap. But let's recommend his nephew, who may do the same thing to your child. Like, do you even know what this guy is capable of? Ugh. I get it. She's being abused. Maybe as a result of that, things may be a little different, but we'll see. Like his uncle, Glenn was a Jack Mormon. His family was once devout, perhaps, but he didn't practice Mormonism. He was certainly no fundamentalist, no holder of the priesthood. Mother knew this meant he wasn't marriage material for any girl wishing to live the principle, but she wanted me to have some company, and she thought he was nice, so she encouraged me to give him a chance. Since I had nothing better to do, I moseyed on over to Nielsen's ranch not long after I got home. I met up with Glenn, and he invited me to go with him to work in the hayfield. The day passed quickly in spite of the summer heat. I acted completely myself, being silly and cutting up most of the day. That night, Glenn and I lay on the lawn beneath a big oak tree in front of the ranch house. We talked until almost midnight. He was kind and attentive to me in a way no man had ever been before, my father and Horace most especially. I was able to explain my dilemma to him, and he understood and commiserated. In his view, he said, God gave us free agency as a gift, not as a tool with which to taunt and confuse us. Why would he give us desires he wanted us to deny? After all, isn't God love? I recall these things making perfect sense to me at the time. What drew me to Glenn even more, though, was the familiar loneliness I sensed in him. It seemed a loneliness perfectly matching my own. All at once, in a single day, I found another soul who might give my life meaning. Someone I thought would completely understand me. She is like longing for companionship in a way that is scary to me. We were so compatible, we spent the rest of the summer together. His being 13 years older than me made no difference to either one of us. We were inseparable. She's too young. It just don't, that 13-year-old difference makes a difference when you're that young. I'm sorry. He loved me in a way I'd never been loved before, fully and unconditionally. I could be my silly self, and Glenn thought it was wonderful. With him, I didn't have to curb what so many others unflatteringly described as my light-mindedness. He never reprimanded me. Instead, I could sing and laugh, talk, cry, or be funny without ever wondering if it was out of line. This man loved me for me. I was surprised by immense joy when Glenn and I would lie together on the lawn. We'd hold hands. His kisses set me afire. So she's doing stuff with Glenn that she's not even supposed to be doing. But you want this to be your priesthood? Okay. When he held me, I melded to him deliciously. Aunt Rhea's law of purity seemed to have no application here. I even dared to thank God for letting me experience something so wonderful as Glenn's kisses. I never wanted to be anywhere else but in his arms. Best of all, we dreamed and planned for days we would belong to each other and no one else. Somehow, our love blocked out all my fears of eternal hell. Heaven couldn't be better than what I found here with Glenn, and hell couldn't be worse than going back to not having him. I literally closed my mind to God, to the principle, to everything that might say no to this. When Glenn and I were together, I could forget the rigid rules that placed our love squarely out of bounds. But Excuse me. Y'all, this is what happens when I think I'm gonna have to cut this short. I just got a minute. But alone at night, I was hunted by the well-ingrained fundamentalist Mormon dogma. I asked God if he might consider changing his harsh rules, perhaps grant me an exemption. I wanted him to understand Glenn, who I thought was good, if not better than I. Was it his fault he wasn't born a Mormon fundamentalist, wasn't born under the covenant? It didn't mean he was a very special person. What I wanted to have with Glenn was not plural marriage anyway. I wanted monogamy exclusive. I wanted monogamy exclusive. Adding another wife would destroy what we were together, spoil the intense two-way connection that so enthralled me. It was unthinkable. No, I did not want God to let Glenn become a last-minute child of the covenant. I wanted God to exempt us from the principle altogether. I wondered about my supposed premonition, that I was going to marry Verlin LeBaron. He was personable and good-looking, and he held the priesthood, all the qualifications any obedient woman would want. My beliefs drew me to Verlin, but I was in love with Glenn. Perhaps I also saw Glenn as a way out of polygamy. That's a good question. A choice that would save me from ever having to think about a husband of mine being off in another room making love to one of my sister wives. I decided I preferred to be Glenn's only wife, to grab joy now and face hell later. So I consented to our marriage, but I did so with considerable trepidation. We only told a few people of our plans, mostly those who wouldn't oppose them. I wrote to my sister Donna and asked her to bring my hope chest to Trout Creek if by chance she came our way. She was one of the sisters living in Short Creek. I had a strong bond with Donna, and I valued her opinion. Though she was devoted to polygamy, I trusted her not to brand me as an outcast if I chose a different path. Perhaps I suspected Donna might try and talk me out of marrying Glenn, and if she could do it, I wouldn't have to face God's wrath for marrying him. Our day finally arrived, September 1st, 1952. Glenn and I, both of our mothers, were loaded into Uncle Charlie's old beige Kaiser, ready to leave for Salt Lake City, where we'd be married in 5 days later. Glenn's Uncle Charlie, who was paying for the wedding, had just finished rearranging our suitcases in the trunk. As soon as he got into the driver's seat, he laid his head on the steering wheel. His face was colorless. "I'm sick," he announced. "Can't we all get up early and leave tomorrow?" I was furious. Someone else should drive, or Uncle Charlie should even stay home. We had so much shopping to do in Salt Lake, so many details to take care of before the wedding and the reception, and my brother Richard's. But since all of it was to be Uncle Charlie's gift, we pretty much had to agree to go the next day. Mother and I slept at Nilsson's ranch so we could leave as early as possible. At 4 a.m., I was jarred awake by a loud pounding on the door. The pounding continued, so I quickly slipped into my jeans and scampered up to the front door before anyone else was disturbed. When I drew back the bolt and opened the door, there stood Donna and her husband, Clyde. Under a cool, starless sky, the three of us convened in their car for a private conversation. I listened intently as Donna revealed a premonition she received. They traveled all night to warn me. "Thank God, honey, you're still here," she said. "I've come to bring you to your senses." She spoke excitedly. "Irene, God sent us. You must not marry an unbeliever who can't exalt you. You're a child born into the principle. Please don't give up your bright right. God is counting on you." My whole world teetered. I wished I'd never been born a child of God. But since I was, I had to consider if he might actually have gone to all this trouble to warn me not to make a grave mistake. Had Charlie's sudden illness possibly been God's doing? Had he really given Donna this premonition? Was this my one last chance to correct my path and serve the Lord? By now, Glenn had come outside and strolled by the car several times, hoping we invited him to participate in our conversation. He thought he was included in all my plans, but he also knew what a stronghold my family had on me. He paced a few yards away from us, waiting to be called over to the car. I watched him while I silently rehearsed the fateful, awful words Donna insisted would end what she called my predicament. I couldn't see myself saying them, not ever. But then here was my beloved sister who had driven all night to catch me before I abandoned our beautiful doctrine and threw in with the common monogamous riffraff who would never be exalted. I really chose love over God, a selfish life of freedom over a life of noble God-honoring obedience. Would I really let down Donna and Aunt Rhea and so many others I loved? I don't really agree with her getting married as young as she was, but I also don't agree with this situation either if she really felt like she loved that man. Suddenly, I felt ashamed. Of course, I couldn't shirk my duty to God at any cost. God must always come before love, before my personal feelings. I thought of the words of one of our favorite hymns. Sacrifice brings forth blessings of heaven. If God required that I sacrifice Glenn, then I had no right to question it. He was God, after all, and I've been taught that God's faithful ones would be tested, like Abraham, whose son God ordered to sacrifice on the altar. How I had dared ask for exemption from God's testing, from obeying his will. With my heart bursting and paralyzed with misgivings, I got out of the car and walked slowly through the darkness to where Glenn waited. He looked at me somewhat angrily as I approached. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. My mind whirled. I opened my mouth to deliver my speech, but my tongue froze. My mind went blank. "Glenn," I finally stammered. "I know you won't understand, because I don't." I started to cry, so brokenheartedly I couldn't finish my sentence. I buried my head in his shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. But these few words had already told him all he needed. My mind had been twisted back around. I'd been reprogrammed in a single pre-dawn session. "Let's get out of here," he said. "Don't listen to them." I finally managed to say, "I can't marry you, Glenn, because you can't exalt me." I pushed away from him and shoved the diamond locket he'd given me as a token of our engagement into his hand. Then I ran back to Donna's car. I sobbed to Donna, "If you come to save me, then let's get out of here now." Through the trees and the tears, I watched Glenn standing there, all alone as we drove out of sight. What in God's name did the future hold now? This is not the end of the chapter, but I got an emergency that I got to attend to. I'm so sorry I'm cutting it short like this. I don't normally end chapters like this, but they are blowing up my phone. Thank you so much. Like the video. It helps the channel. Maybe until next time.